Well, I'm so glad to be here. You know, if I remember right, last time I was here was December, and it was such a fun time being able to see so many friendly faces. And the way that when you guys first heard about this church plant, you guys came around and were willing to help, and we're willing to pray, and we're willing to contribute in so many different ways, whether it be through this church or directly in Casper a lot of the time. I just want to thank you for that. That was so encouraging, so exciting. You know, church plants fail some of the time, and a lot of the time the reason for that is because they don't have supporting churches near them that are actually helping out. And that is just not the case with this church plant. We have New Life here that has been such an amazing sending church to be willing to contribute and be willing to be part of this journey, part of this church plant process. So I've been super excited to share some updates with you guys. I've been getting quite a few questions. I've been getting a lot of updates about how you guys have been praying and how you can continue to be praying. So we actually have a name this time, Uncharted Church. Super excited about that. A lot of that comes from my background in rock climbing and in mountaineering and in ski mountaineering and doing that kind of stuff, where I would go deep into the mountains and find myself in these circumstances that I wasn't sure I would make it out of those circumstances, and be a lot more dependent on God than I had ever been in my life. It was such a humbling experience, and yet it allowed me to meet God in a way that I never had up till that point. And so now, anytime I go into what I think of as uncharted territory, I remember I'm dependent on God. There are things out of my control, and I need to trust God to be able to work those out. I'm going into the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know that God's there. I just know I'm going to get to experience God. I'm going to meet him. And so that's part of the deal with the church for us too. With this new church is we're doing things that no other church in Casper has done before. We're taking risks that no other church in Casper is willing to take, so that we can connect with people in the community, so that we can actually be part of the community. A lot of churches will expect people to go and seek out the church. We're doing the opposite. We've got over 20 events this summer that are put on by community leaders there that we're part of as a church in all different kinds of ways, and we're present as a church there. And so we're taking the church out to them constantly. Every single week we're present in the community as a church. It's so exciting. We've already seen God moving in so many different ways. And that's where your prayers come in. Your prayers make that possible. Your prayers help us to stay in tune with God and stay in tune with what he's doing. Because if he's not part of this, then this isn't going to work at all. So thank you guys. You know, if you want to learn more, if you have any questions, if you just want to talk about more details, share how you're praying, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to be able to chat with you after this service. I'll be hanging out somewhere in the back lobby. It would be fun to be able to chat all the more about this church plant that I'm so excited about. And I think this is just the beginning. I think with Paul and Karen's church plant is just getting started. We're just getting warmed up. So excited. I also have the honor of being able to teach this morning. I think we had a fun time last time. Hopefully we can have a fun time again this time. And to start us off, I became a little bit of a history buff the last couple of weeks. I have some fun history stuff if you want to get into that with me. In August of 2000, 118 crew members died when a series of explosions caused a Russian submarine named the Kursk to sink. 23 of these members survived in an isolated chamber for several hours after the explosion. One of them was a lieutenant captain, 27-year-old lieutenant captain named Dmitry Kolesnikov. He wrote a note to his wife while he was waiting to die. 2 words from that note were displayed in a black frame next to his coffin at the funeral service. "Mustn't despair," he wrote. "Mustn't despair." And it isn't real clear from the note who those words are directed for. It could have been that he was talking to himself, saying that he should continue to hope against hope that rescue is going to come. It could have been that he was talking to himself, saying that he needs to continue to hope for what is in store for him after his life is over. It could have been that they were meant for his wife, saying that she needs to move on without him after his death. It isn't real clear. But for a 27-year-old Russian sailor whose life is suddenly, unexpectedly ended at the bottom of the ocean, these are his final words: "Mustn't despair, mustn't despair." It's a strange thing. A few human beings, not many, but occasionally there's one, experience a moment in their lives when they know they're going to die. They know. And it's almost instinctive at that point, when that moment comes, to leave some kind of message behind. They want people to know their story and read their message. Passengers of a JAL airliner in 1985, spiraling down to their death, used their final moments to write letters to their loved ones. Prisoners of the Nazis in a Warsaw ghetto, having seen everyone else shot or starved to death, used their last breath to write letters and put it in the crevice in a wall in the hope that someone other than the Nazis would read their notes and know their story. In that final moment, all the scaffolding of life gets stripped away. All those stupid toys that we spend our lives chasing, success, reputation, comfort, wealth, security, safety, ease, mean nothing. And a person is left with what they really believe in, what you really built your life on. If that moment were to come for you, and guys, one day it will. We spend our whole lives pretending that isn't going to come. But recognized or not, that moment will come. If that moment were here for you right now, what would you write? What message do you want to leave behind? What's your story, really? Turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3. If you're following along in your own Bibles, we will be starting to read in verse 16. If not, that's totally fine. We will also have the words up on the screen as I go through them. This final moment came in the lives of 3 young men, possibly just the age of Captain Kolesnikov. They were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these are young men who have lives that are full of so much promise. They've risen to positions of power in the world's most powerful nation. They can look forward to great families, deeply fulfilling lives, doing great things for their people and their nation. They are so full of hopes and dreams still. And I'll tell you what's been remarkable to me about this story as I've studied it. Most people, this final moment, it just comes when it comes. At that point, typically, death is inescapable. There's nothing you can do. Every possible avenue has been explored. For these guys, it was completely avoidable. All they had to do, you got to understand, all they had to do was say the word, and they'd be spared. King Nebuchadnezzar has set up this golden statue that he wants them to bow down to and worship. All they have to do is say the word and bend their knee, and their lives will be spared. They're headed towards unimaginable pain and death. And one bent knee, one word, will restore all their power, all their honor, all their status. And as I read through this story, I think to myself, it would be so easy for me to just give in. It would be so easy for me to justify it intellectually, for me to just say, God knows I'm not worshiping this statue. God knows that I'm actually worshiping him. And I want to honor this culture. I want to honor these people. And so it would be so easy for me to just bend one knee, for me to just say one word and spare myself that fate. These guys have that option, but they won't say it. They won't bend that knee. They won't say that word. They recognize that would cause their lives to be a lie. They'd be living a lie. They have the choice between life and death, and they choose death. That kind of devotion to God really is possible for ordinary people. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." And that looks like their final words. Mustn't despair. We pick it up in verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. His whole attitude changes. If you look back in verse 15, you'll see that Nebuchadnezzar, up till this point, was kind of using the velvet glove approach. He was mad, but he was trying to woo them over to the other side. He said, when you hear the sound of the music, if you want to bow down and worship, very good. You'll get it all back. Your lives will be restored. But in the face of their unshakable loyalty and devotion to the one living God, he's infuriated. He's ticked off. He completely loses control. So he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Stop right there, talk about this for a minute. 7, the number 7 throughout the Bible is this symbol to say a lot of the time. It was considered in the ancient world the most perfect number, a lot of the time the highest number, the biggest number. Nebuchadnezzar, he's ticked off, he's enraged, he's lost control. He's saying, crank that furnace up as hot as you can get it. I want these guys to burn. And so I want to ask you to stop and think for just a moment about what these guys are facing. Have you ever burned yourself with a match or with your hand on a stove? Anyone here? A couple of us. One small part of your body, for just one moment, will create a very healthy respect for fire in you. This is considered one of the most physically painful ways for someone to die. And in addition to the physical pain that can be involved with this, you need to know that historically, this is considered one of the most inhumane forms of execution. It involves treating a human being like an object, like a stick of wood to be disposed of, so that there isn't even a corpse left to mourn afterwards, which in the ancient world was a big deal. Historically, it's been reserved for witches, heretics, just people that society wants gone, just people society wants disposed of. It's one of the cruelest, most painful, most inhumane treatments in the whole cruel history of our race. That's what these guys are waiting for. That's what these 3 men are facing. And they face it voluntarily. One word, one bent knee will spare them that fate. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. Notice the description of their clothes. We'll come back to that later. That's an important detail for us. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. These guys, so securely bound that they have to be carried to the furnace. And the furnace is so hot that the soldiers who carry them up there, who are the strongest in the army, collapse and die from just being near the furnace. These details are important to the writer. The writer wants us to understand that Nebuchadnezzar's rage is so intense that he's willing to kill some of his own soldiers to make this happen. This is not a story about a group of guys running away from a lukewarm fire. There is no hope, humanly speaking. Immobilized bodies are being tossed into a raging inferno. That's the setting. And so I want you to stop for a moment and try, as best as you can, to imagine the experience of these 3 guys. They've been faithful to the end. When they first heard about the command to bow down to this golden statue, they've seen the end in sight. They've known what might be happening. And every avenue, every door of exit has been closed to them. Faithful to the last. And now they're bound and being carried up to the furnace. Real people. Filled with fear, maybe some anxiety, a whole lot of courage, a whole lot of defiance and faith. They feel the heat of the furnace. They see the men who carried them there collapse and die from the flames. And then they're in the furnace. And they wait for the searing pain, the numbness, the smoke inhalation that will eventually suffocate them. But it doesn't come. They don't feel any different. And it begins to dawn on them, they're not even warm. No burns, no smoke. They're not tied up anymore. They're walking around in there. And that's not even the best part. The best part is what turns this from a miracle to a divine encounter. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god. There is a 4th member of the furnace club, and he is unharmed. And apparently he's the one who delivered the other 3. And they have a little meeting right there in the furnace. Who is this 4th man who appears from nowhere, who can cheat death, and who looks in appearance like a god?" Well, the text doesn't say, but I think maybe it was Jesus. It seems like the kind of thing that he would do. And apparently they spent a little time in there together. They were walking around in there. They must have had something going on. They had the world's greatest life group meeting right there in the furnace. 1 leader, 3 apprentices. They were going to have an open chair for someone to join, but it burned up. And I wonder what they talked about in there. I wonder if Jesus told them how proud the Father was for their loyalty and devotion and love. I wonder if he told them that their names would be remembered for thousands of years because of this one act. Their grotesque names that the Babylonians gave them to help make them forget their names that had God in them. Their names would be remembered. 2.5 millennia later, other side of the world, different culture, different language. We remember their names. I wonder if he told them how hundreds and thousands of people who eventually did end up dying for their faith in God would be immeasurably strengthened by this one act of courage that they had. And I wonder what they told him. I'll bet they poured out adoration and praise and gratitude like they never had before. It's a funny thing. They had come to that place planning on needing to withhold worship from a false god, and they ended up worshiping like they never had in their lives. Worship is like that. And the furnace, which looked like the end of their lives, ended up being the greatest thing that ever happened to them. The can't-miss event of their lives. And here's the point of the whole story. They were hoping to get delivered from the furnace, but God decided to deliver them in the furnace. Sometimes God delivers people from the furnace, but sometimes God delivers people in the furnace. Jesus said to them what he says still, "I'll meet you in the furnace." Because he's a furnace kind of guy. And it's the place where full devotion to God can lead you. It looks scary, it looks dangerous, it looks risky, it looks painful, and sometimes it even looks like the end. But as it turns out, that's where Jesus is. And as it turns out, amazingly enough, that's the safest place to be. As it turns out, it's the adventure of a lifetime. You know, this is why I'm so passionate about church planning. This is one of the reasons I care so deeply about it. I talk to church planners all the time, and I'm part of the Awaken network, which is constantly planning churches. And New Life is planting churches, and we're always talking about this. And all we talk about is how God is there. We meet God there. Church planning, it's a furnace experience. But he says to us what he said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego: "I'll meet you in the furnace." You know, we named Uncharted Church. Yeah, I got a background in climbing and mountaineering. But really, we want to meet God, and we want other people to meet God, and we believe God is in the furnace. We believe he meets people there. We believe we're willing to go out into uncharted territory, into the unknown, and have this crazy adventure and take these crazy risks, because that's where God is. I'm not the only one. That's why church planners plant a church. We meet God there. God says to them what he says to me, what he says to church planners, what he says to the Awaken Network, what he says to church leaders, what he says to New Life, what he says to Christ followers all over the world, and what he may be saying to some of you now. I'll meet you in the furnace. I will meet you there. We'll see you there. Let's keep going. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." It doesn't say this, but I bet he kept a considerable distance from that furnace. I doubt he got that close. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Wouldn't you love to see that walk? I might try to strut a little bit coming out of that furnace. That would be a great walk. I'd love to see that. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Remember back in verse 21, the amount of time the writer dedicates to describing exactly what they were wearing? Why did he do this? Did he have an eye for fashion? No. The whole point, the thing he wants us to understand here is that the extent of the miracle that's happening. Not only were they saved and the hair on their head wasn't burned and they didn't even smell of smoke, but God even saved their clothes. He wants us to understand how far this went. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." They defied the king's command. Who's the king? He's the king. Nebuchadnezzar's the king. Just a minute ago, he was willing to burn them alive for defying his own authority, and now he's congratulating them for doing it. Something is happening in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar. God is doing something in his life. He seems to be reaching King Nebuchadnezzar through these three guys. "Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble." He wasn't big on the freedom of worship deal. Not a big Bill of Rights kind of guy. He's got a little work on that. "There is no other God who can rescue like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. They're promoted. More opportunities to serve, more opportunities to help their people and their God after that. I wonder what the rest of their lives were like. We don't really know. This is the last time they're ever mentioned in the Bible. I wonder as they went through life if they ever thought about how easily they could have missed out on that. One word, one bent knee, one way to just intellectually justify that action. And they would have missed it. I wonder if they thought about that. How quickly, how easily that would have come, how natural that would have been to avoid the furnace, to run away from that. I bet they thought about that a lot. I wonder if when they were old men, decades later, if they would get together and wear their old robes and talk about what happened, talk about when they were young men, how they defied a king, how they were filled with defiance and courage, and they walked around in the flames and spent a few moments in the presence of the living God. I bet they did. I bet they did, because I think that when you spend some time in the furnace with Jesus, it marks you. You carry it to the grave, because you're a changed person after that. You carry that for the rest of your life. You never forget those experiences. It's so much better than the alternative that we sometimes bend the knee to. It marks us. And I say this, we study this together, because living in our world today, I think there's a great danger we have to be careful about. Not just people here in Gillette, but people living in any first class, a typical life in any first class country. And the danger is this, that we make the primary goal of our lives furnace avoidance. That we pray to God, God, make my life easy. Make my life smooth. Deliver me from obstacles. Remove all the obstacles from my life. Make it an endless succession of easy days for me. Deliver me from inconvenience. Deliver me from suffering, from discomfort, from pain. Make it comfortable for me. We struggle a lot of the time with even low-level flames. And it amazes me a lot of the time, we have these amazing human spirits that are made in the image of God. And they're made to be in union with God and experience this infinite joy. And yet we settle for, and we get wrapped up and upset around all these trivial and stupid things. Someone cut me off on the interstate. Now my day's ruined. My boss gave me an angry look. I'm offended. I didn't get the recognition I deserve from my work or from my school or from the opposite gender. I'm not climbing my career high enough up the ladder that I absolutely must be climbing up. I'm not getting the comfortable life I want. Someone interrupted my time. Someone created an obstacle in my life. We get wrapped up in all this when we have infinite joy at our fingertips. If we aren't careful, we bend that knee to the statue. We miss out on this can't miss event of our lives. Jesus says it still, I'll meet you in the furnace. He's a furnace kind of guy. He'll meet you there. And so I want to ask you to consider, no one can force you to do this. I want to ask you to consider today praying a prayer with me at the end of this sermon. It's kind of a risky prayer. It's a little bit of a dangerous prayer for us. And here's the prayer. God, give me the chance to show my devotion to you. It's a little risky because it might lead to a furnace. But it turns out that's the safest place of all because that's where God is. That's where Jesus says, I'll meet you in the furnace, he says. I'll meet you there. I'll see you there. As I was prepping this sermon and thinking about you guys, I had this image, this picture of what this could be like. It's a picture of God having a calendar. And I know that God doesn't need a calendar. He's omniscient and he's omnipresent, and so he doesn't need to remember to go someplace because he's always already there. But all that aside, I have this picture of God having a calendar, and whatever time that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went into the furnace, he has penciled in on that calendar, meet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. He had that penciled in on the calendar, meet them there. And as I thought about you guys, I thought, where does God have you penciled in on the calendar? Where did he write your name, meet you in the furnace? And will you make it? Or might you bend the knee to the wrong God? Might you bend the knee to the golden statue? It would be so easy to miss. But God's saying, I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. Will you make it? I don't know where your lives take place on this calendar. I don't know what that looks like for you. Maybe God's been whispering in your ear to get involved in some kind of servanthood or ministry or something. Maybe it looks like serving in the city or going overseas or serving the poor or maybe serving in the church somewhere. Maybe you have a spiritual gift that you've been avoiding using. It feels like the furnace. God's in the furnace. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's some kind of relationship. It's someone you need to be investing in. Or an unhealthy relationship. You need to distance and set healthy boundaries. Maybe it's some kind of financial hardship. Maybe it's sacrificial giving. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like for you. I just know that in this world, a lot of the time, that golden statue takes on names like comfort and pleasure and ease and security and safety and wealth and success and reputation. And it's so easy to miss that furnace. So easy to miss out on that. But God says, I'll meet you there. If you're there, I'll be there. I'll meet you there. So somewhere along the line, too many people in too many churches got the idea that following Jesus had something to do with living an easier life. So I'll put it in the form of a question. How many heroes of our faith had easy lives? How many? If you look at Hebrews chapter 11, it's our hall of faith. It lists a bunch of heroes of the faith. The writer says, I don't have time to list them all, and just list their achievements and what they faced, including quenching the flames. How many heroes of the faith had an easy life? Where did Jesus say, follow me, and I have a wonderful plan for your life, and that primarily involves a big house, an attractive spouse, a terrific job, a great car, an endless succession of easy days? Basically, what Jesus said was, follow me, and you'll have a great big God, outrageous joy, and you'll be in trouble all the time. And people followed. People followed by the hundreds and by the thousands and by the tens of thousands. People followed him to servanthood, to sacrifice, to community, to persecution, to suffering. And they followed him to death. And when that final moment came, They knew. Mustn't despair. God didn't forget them. God didn't overlook them. God didn't abandon them. God said to them what he said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What he said to Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr. What he said to Paul and Peter, who were persecuted and imprisoned and beaten and eventually martyred as well. What he said to Corrie ten Boom, to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to Martin Luther King. What he said to Mother Teresa on the streets of Calcutta. What he says still all over the world to believers in Albania, in China, in India, in South America, and maybe what he's saying to some people this morning in Gillette. I'll meet you in the furnace. I'll meet you in the furnace if you dare. So now I want to ask you to pray a dangerous prayer with me. Let's pray. God, wow. We are so convicted by this story of men who were willing to give up their lives voluntarily, face the flames for their devotion to you. We thank you so much for how you call us to something so much better than just the conveniences and comforts of this world, God. And so we want to pray a bold prayer. We want to ask something bold. We ask, God, that you give us the chance to show our devotion to you. Give us courage in the face of these furnace experiences. Sometimes it's intimidating, it's scary, it's dangerous, it's risky. Give us the courage to face that with our devotion to you. Give us the opportunity to show that devotion, Lord. We love you. We praise you so much. Pray this in your name. Amen.